The representation of the indie game studios on the new Switch 2 is kinda lackluster right now, and there is a good reason for that. It has to do with the very fact that this is a new console. Now, I want to kind of put any thoughts of fear-mongering away right off the bat, because it looks like this kind of happens with every console release, not just for Nintendo, but just for a ton of consoles. There's like those initial starting games by the actual console developer, whether it's Xbox or PlayStation or Nintendo. And then that's just kind of it, you know, in the first few days, few weeks of the new console, it's kind of just like the tumbleweed floating through the desert. It feels very empty. You see, there's kind of a rhyme and reason for that, and it has to do with development kits. Basically, it's up to the console maker to issue out these development kits to other studios that are obviously not owned by that console's developer. And that can be a problem when these studios, especially these small studios, don't really have access to these dev kits, and it maybe is going to take months for that to happen. So GamesIndustry.biz just released an article on this. I'm going to link it in the description. But they interviewed a few people on this, a few indie developers, kind of to get some insight on how things are looking right now with the Switch 2. It does say here that Deltarune and No Man's Sky are among the lucky ones that managed to get past the velvet rope, and that is, of course, for indie developers. I believe some others did get through that as well, but it says Tony Gowland from the Edinburgh-based indie studio Ant Workshop says this slow cadence of releases is typical for any console launch, a time when development kits for the new machine are usually in short supply. It's really up to speculation as far as why console makers are kind of secretive about these development kits right off the bat. My best guess is that they probably don't want a lot of things, a lot of specs about the new console leaking out, so they can't exactly send these dev kits out, you know, like 2 years before the console is released. I'm sure there are a lot of other reasons as well, but as far as the indie studios that are getting kind of the first hands on these dev kits for the Switch 2, it says that Tony Gowland feels that Nintendo is prioritizing titles that would not be doable on the previous console. Essentially, I'd assume that means as far as the Nintendo Switch 1, you know, its specs. So he said, the indie folks I know who have been successful in getting kits are working on games that are in need of the Switch 2's extra oomph. But as far as the indie studios that are not getting their hands on this dev kit right now, I'm sure there's quite a bit of frustration for this. I mean, they want to join the Switch 2 party. My takeaway from this whole thing is right here where it says, what we would like to see in the short term is communication and clarity to indie studios on what we can expect in terms of when and how access to kits will open up. We are very keen to support the platform, and knowing a timeline would allow us to plan for that. Yeah, obviously there seems to be at least some degree of miscommunication or kind of no communication from Nintendo right now, and I'd assume that kind of is emphasized the smaller your indie studio is, unfortunately, because we can really get some bangers from small indie studios, but it is what it is right now. In the early days of consoles, it does sound like this is kind of the norm, so as I said, I suppose no need to panic. This isn't a unique problem for the Switch 2, but definitely one that is probably stressing out a lot of indie developers.